at that point, I was like, "Hey, I lived a full life, but I didn't know how much more life my life had, how much more stuff you could stick in to really make it greater, because there's always a way to turn things around."
None of us become who we're meant to be alone. Every story has people who helped write it. So let's talk about them. Welcome to the Mentor Sessions.
All right, so here we are with David. And Dave, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about you and tell us your story?
Hey, we got plenty of stories to tell. My name's Dave Shemetsky. I'm a mentor, and I do a lot of things. Publish books. I help people write books, and I train people how to reduce stress in their lives. So, it's a package. It's like a branding to make sure that you're speaking your most authentic self and having that message in everything that you do. That's what real branding is not just, a logo or things like that. It's knowing who you are. And, I'm so, strong in that we have to be who we are, no matter what. I've believe me, I've been plenty places in life that I wasn't always showing up as me, but now 100% I show up as me because that's who I am.
So how'd your journey start? Like, let's go back in time to before you started doing all this and pick up to where you're from, your life experiences, and what got you to where we are now.
Yeah, it's been a long, as I guess the Grateful Dead, right? What a long, strange road it's been, right? Or Paul McCartney also, right? Winding road. But
So the Grateful Dead, one of my favorite bands. That's one of my favorite lines, and that was kind of the theme when I retired from the sheriff's office. What a long, strange trip it's been, because that's exactly how I felt. So yeah, sorry for interrupting, but I
yeah,
love
no,
that you
no,
quoted that.
but it's so true, right? The truth behind it is, I grew up I was born on a Air Force base. My dad was serving in Texas. So I was born on Lackland Air Force Base. For any of your listeners who might have been a service person, and we went back to Brooklyn. That's where my parents knew. That's what they knew. Even though they had done some traveling, they knew Brooklyn, and that's really where I grew up. And as you can hear, I have a little bit of that New York accent. And it was a really regular blue collar stuff, but we don't realize some of the things that we learned, the things that we didn't know that we learned, anger and things like that have kind of brought me along the way. But I had a regular, childhood, for the most part. High school, average guy, nothing special, nothing, played ball, love baseball. And 20, I met somebody, and I was ready to make the big plunge, and then she got killed by a drunk driver. And
Holy crap!
yeah, so I was 20, so for 5 years, and I had a survivor guilt. I didn't know it. uh, Back in the day, Mike, you probably remember, right? You weren't allowed to be long distance for long. It was like a quick call, but this
Oh
girl,
yeah, oh, 100%. Tell us, if you don't mind. Tell us more about her and that experience.
yeah. So I knew this girl all my life. We grew up together. Families were pretty tight, and we started dating around 12, 13, 14, around there, and it got serious. She was smart, man. Not like I'm okay, but I'm average. But she was like nosebleed smart. She got like a, what was it, a 1590 or 1580 on the SATs, almost a perfect score. She went to Stanford, and that's where she spent a lot of her years during those 4 years of college. She was going to stay here to be with me, and I was like, "Nah, man, you're not passing up on Stanford for me. I'm not going anywhere." And one night, we talked, and she was like, "Man, I don't," she had like a 4.0. She was like really, yeah, extremely smart, and you know, I was like, "Go to a party, like go have a good time, like relax, with your girlfriends and stuff like that." And they were walking on a street and they got killed. Well, not she was the only one who was killed, but the two other girls were physically damaged, as well as probably psychologically.
So was there at Stanford?
Stanford, yeah, yeah, in Stanford. So, but I was the last person to speak to her out of the family, and I told her to go. Like she was gonna hedge out, and I was like, "Go, man, have a good time. Like, it's all good." And no, I said I love you, and that was it. And at 20, man, you're not capable of handling that. And back in the day, man, right? They rub it off. You get hurt, rub it off, walk it off, and all that stuff. A lot of people gave me advice that they thought they were going to be well, but they didn't, right? It didn't, and you don't know. And eventually, you move on with life. I mean, no matter what happens, you can be there, but you move on with life. And I didn't know that until 35 years later, that I still was carrying so much guilt around her death, because during the pandemic, I'm reading some poems, and I'm sitting home alone. I'm reading some poems that I wrote to her, and I just started bawling out crying. And I was like, where'd that come from? And that was, a big blow to me. I was like, whoa, how'd that happen? I mean, I always thought about her, get a little emotional at times. The what ifs, become very heavy for us. But other than that, my life was good. I eventually did marry somebody. I had two wonderful girls and got divorced, like most of America. And, none of those things are fun. And, life sometimes is a challenge, and I've had challenges, but I've had lots of great things also throughout life. I mean, I've been a TEDx speaker. I've published books. I write a lot. When I'm by myself, I dive into myself. I've learned a lot of things. I've helped people. One time I had gone into therapy, and I learned this amazing technique called havening, and it's a psychosensory touch modality. I always say, I'll teach you how to touch yourself in a special way to make you feel better. But it's really just about rubbing your hands together slowly. And when people could do that, it'll create delta waves, and it'll be able to calm you down a little bit. There's a whole lot more into it, but that's where life has gone. So, from that beginning in Brooklyn to where I am now, completely different people. And I think about it so often, because, the little boy, at times, would have never imagined all the things that I've got to do, and the people that I've met, and the opportunities that I've had. Because I worked for a major corporation. One of the things that you and I talked about offline is, I worked at 30 years in corporate America. And then at 55, they gave me the golden handshake. Thanks, you're on your way. And
So what kind of work did you do there?
I was in legal. I wasn't a lawyer. I was like a paralegal, or, paralegal on steroids is what one of my bosses once explained to me. They would just put me into situations that, man, I don't know, Dave will figure it out. Dave, could you do that? I don't know. I'll figure it out. And for the most part, I did. I worked for 10 years. I worked for a law firm. So I just got hit with a lot of hours. And anybody who's done those or have jobs that with overtime, you know how much of your body you're giving away to do that. And I did that. And then I had this opportunity to work in corporate America, in-house counsel, as a paralegal. And I ran with that for a while. I worked with Pfizer. So, it was, crazy. I probably didn't realize it, like while you're in it, like when you're in the stuff, you don't think about it. But I worked on billion-dollar products. I met the inventors of some of the biggest products in the world. I met them on a first name basis. I worked with them, and helped manage them at times also, in terms of working in a litigation space. So it's been a really interesting experience. Again, that wild, crazy ride, man.
Yeah. You mentioned that they gave you the golden handshake. Was that they just decided, well, we're not doing this, we're not going forward with your position anymore? Or was it they downsizing, as they like to call it in that industry?
Yeah, it was downsizing, and truthfully, I had seen this. I'd been with the company 22 years at that point, and, I'd seen it every 3 to 5 years. There was a downsizing effort. They grow, they get downsized, grow, downsize. So I knew at some point that was gonna be it, and, I was lucky enough to make it to 55. I've been planning that. So there's a lot of things that I was planning now I did plan on working a little longer than 55, but I knew that my long-term plan was not to be in corporate America. And, that's where I started doing the coaching. When I started learning havening, I was like this 78th person in the world to be certified in that technique. And I learned how to do that. My background was in a behavioral science. So it was stuff that even though I found a job that was well paying and I was able to focus on something else, I knew my path was going to lie somewhere else.
So when you got that, as you called it, the golden handshake, where were you at mentally when that happened? What did that do how'd that affect you mentally?
Well, I really I grieved a little bit, but I really embraced that. I knew what was gonna happen. It happened very quickly. It happened within the span of, like 3 months, I guess, maybe even less, I think. But because I had been planning a life after or a side hustle at that time, I was able to do that, and because of my experience, I was able to step into a position that I would have never even tried for, as a COO of a manufacturing company in Westchester, which is near me, near where I live. It was a friend of mine's company, but he was, he needed some more organization, and you don't know what skills you have sometimes until you're actually thrown into the deep water. He's like, "Man, I know you can help me." He goes, "I just know it," and I did. For 2.5 years, I worked with him, and I just recently quit only because of a medical situation. There's a lot of stress. Managing stress, and I teach people how to manage stress. So, but that doesn't mean it's still going to go away. It's that constant thing. So you have to make choices and find what supports you have. And for me, it was finding out I had 2 blockages that were 98% full. We were almost done, and I got a stent, and I said to, my best friend, I mean, I just went to a ball game the other day and I said, "Hey, man, I'm out. I gotta figure out some things," and I've gone full tilt into my business. I've always been really good at doing what I have to do, but now I'm, just doing it for myself. I have my podcast. I have a whole bunch of great things going on, and doing the solopreneur thing instead of being into putting my foot into 2 different spaces.
So I know that feeling because that's kind of where I just was. Like we talked about, I retired. I had a great career for the sheriff's office there in Utah, and then I was working for a company, and like you had health problems, physical health problems, but it was starting to affect me psychologically, mentally, however you want to
Yeah, yeah.
word it, where you just realize, like someone put it to me once, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze, and those things affect us, our mind, our body, our soul. So when you made the decision, if you will, to step back and focus on building your brand, if you will, focusing on your podcast and stuff like that, how did that, like, how were you able to take that on after the things that you had built? Like, did you feel like it was the right time?
Yeah, the funny thing is I'd been building this all along. I mean, my podcast has 190 episodes out, released already. I've already this past 2 months, I've recorded probably between 45 and 50 episodes. So I'm like, beasting it out, picking up some clients along the way. I had never stepped in fully to be this business. So I've had the business for a while. I've been helping people for years. So once I learned that Havening Touch, I learned a lot of other tools to help people. And originally, when I started my coaching, at that point, I was calling it coaching because I was telling you what to do, right? I was putting in the orders. I was helping people with mental wellness. Now, everybody wants mental wellness, but we don't want to always want to work hard for it. So I understand when you said earlier about that mental wellness, you have to take that stop. And not everybody does that because of a lot of other commitments. And, it's not easy walking away, right? Society tells us, keep pushing. Things aren't going well, keep pushing. That's not always the right way. And that's where using all the things that I have. I mean, I have all these programs over the years I've been building. So I have, it's not just I started to do this. I just started to do it full time. And now that I'm all in, the clarity, the idea that I don't have to focus on what I have to do in the limited time I have. Now I get to control my time and I get to help people. I know the impacts that I've given to people within the past 2 months have been greater, not, well, maybe not greater than before, because I've had some really good impacts. But I know the focus that I have is I am crystal clear, and I now have the goal, the ideas, because I'm only focusing on one thing, and that's to make everybody better, getting their brand in order, and keeping myself healthy. I mean, in the past 2 months, I've reduced 17 pounds. So I'm really embracing this stuff. Yeah, thank you. And it's I'm not there yet, man. I still got some work to do, and it's a lifestyle. It's a decision. I mean, that's where I was in the hospital, and the doctor's like, "You're gonna have to change your diet," and I go, "It's done." And they're like, "No, no, you have to change your diet." I go, "It's done." and they don't believe me. So like, but now I'm going back to those, those checkups, and they're like, you really was serious about that. I was like, yeah, I told you it was done. Like, not saying I'm not going to have any hiccups. I'm not going to do something, but I now know. I mean, one of those things is when you know, when you see something that you don't want to see, you have to confront it, or at least that's what I do. Is I help people confront things.
Yeah, you brought up an interesting thing just there. You're talking about like, you're going to have some hiccups. And I think that's one of the important things to allow ourselves in life when we're going through life is I'm not going to be 100% all the time. You're going to go to a wedding. You're going to go to a party. You're going to sit and just want to have a bowl of ice cream, and allowing yourself those experiences or those opportunities, and without letting it tell your mind, I'm done. I've fallen off the wagon and stuff like that. You talked about these health issues you had and having to have stents put in. You talked about losing your corporate job and then having to step away from the job you're writing for your friend. Like I said, it's still early on this side of the mountain. So these are like some incredible highs and actually some incredible lows that you've had in your life. What do you think was like a connecting thread through all these that have helped you?
Well, it's resilience. It's knowing what to do, and I haven't always. I mean, I also have a suicide attempt somewhere in the middle of that. Also, that sometimes life gets lifing, and it gets really heavy on it. And even though I knew all the resources, like I guarantee you, yeah, like I don't have to ask you the question: is McDonald's good for you? No, it's not, right? So we know those things.
We know that,
right? But we still go there, right? We still go, and you have to make those choices. So for me now, look, that's what I did. That was my diet. I was living by myself. I was doing a lot of eating poorly. My mental wellness wasn't always right, because life will get heavy, and it's how we carry it. And even when we know it, right? Hey man, I know it. But unless you do it, it becomes different, right? I call it the ICTA disease. I know that already, man. Don't worry about it. And it's a lot more than I know it. We got to live the life that we want, and you get to make choices. And now everything regarding my eating is a choice. Do I really want that bowl of ice cream last night? Yeah, I did. But that's probably like the second time in 2 months. And anybody who knows me, man, I would have ice cream every night, and not just like a little scoop. I mean, I like
So
my
one of the things I found, this ice cream, I can't remember the name of it, the full name, I'll tell you, but it's more of a protein-based ice cream. It's called protein something. I'll have to look it up. And it's really good. It's, and yeah, I'm a huge ice cream fan. Really not the topic of the show is discussing ice cream, and talking about bowls, I would find the biggest bowl I could and try to fill it up with ice cream. But now I actually use the little Todd bowls we got for my grandchildren. And it's one of those mind tricks that like, oh, well, this bowl looks full, so I've got a lot of ice cream here. But you mentioned that you had a moment in your life where you were really depressed, that you thought about taking your own life. Do you mind getting into that story and what took you there and what took you out?
Yeah, no, for sure. I talk about that all the time. It's important for us to talk about. And in fact, there was a 36-hour period that I tried a few different ways that I thought were going to be successful, and luckily that wasn't. And I was told by a voice, not God. It was a Grandpa Mike. I don't have a Grandpa Mike, but who said
that's me. That's
well,
me.
there you go, man. One of your Mike brethren.
Yeah.
But it was a situation. He was like, "Go back. You got to tell your story. Your story's not done yet. Go tell your story." And I don't know if it's only about the suicide attempt or mental wellness that we all need to balance and work on. But since then, I've been a published author several times. I've also done a lot of really great stuff. TEDx speaker. So, my TEDx talk, I spoke about mental wellness, and it was the first time I actually spoke about my suicide attempt. And because I kept pushing it out there, I had some families reach out to me initially, and I stopped tracking. And people, reached out. I had 8 people who reached out to me who were thinking about suicide. I was like, well, hey, man, would you talk to me? I was like, yeah, I'll talk to anybody about it. That's sort of where I was and where I had gotten myself to. And I was able to get those people to help. they were able to kind of know what I felt, because while we could think about it and people make judgments about suicide and things like that, they don't know why we do it or why some people feel the need to do it. For me, I was going through a lot of stuff, man. I was going through, divorce. I was being told that I was damaging my children and stuff like that. I was like, man, I didn't damage anybody. I didn't hit anybody. I didn't, in what I was seeing, and I don't want to damage anybody. Anybody who knows me, I have a big heart. I make my mistakes, and I'll own my mistakes. So I don't mind saying.
So how long ago was this at this?
At this point, it's like it's like 6 years ago. I mean, in that. Yeah, in that 6 years, I've done the TEDx talks. I've done the been on stages talking about it. I've done so much positive stuff. And I'll tell you what happened. So right after the suicide attempt, obviously I wasn't successful. I had a lady yell at me and call me white trash and a whole bunch of great names that or labels that she wanted to assign to me. I cried. It's never fun to be trying to be labeled, and no matter what. But I said fuck you, and I didn't say that to her. I just walked away crying, but made her feel good, I guess. But in my world, I was like, hell no. Okay, you might not be where you want to be. Where do you want to be, and how do you get there? And that's exactly what I did. Is inch by inch. Even those days I didn't want to get up, I learned. I put myself back into therapy. I knew the resources, and that's why everybody was like, "Man, how'd you do that?" I was like, "Well, I didn't use my resources." I mean, think about it, right? If you're gonna do something and you don't use your resources, right? We could change. Look, you want to change a tire. Guess what? There's a million ways to change a tire, but there's only one right way, and that's the real truth. So we could do so many different things and take care of ourselves. That's what I've done. And there's been times that I feel bad, right? I don't want to tell you every day's a green light, every day's sunny days. I have my rainy days. I have my moments, but I don't let them go down to that dark spot in my life anymore. At that point, I was like, hey, I lived a full life, but I didn't know how much more life my life had, how much more stuff you could stick in to really make it greater. Because there's always a way to turn things around. It's day by day. It's that brick by brick is how you build a wall.
So when you were in that moment and when you were trying to climb out of there, and whenever, it's kind of funny, the image I always put in front of myself when I think of that, personally, or when people start telling about climbing out of those dark moments, I always look to that image of Bane from, the Dark Knight, climbing out of that hole that they all lived in. And until you've been through that, and I think to some degree or another, we all do go through that, you don't understand that feeling that, like, I had to do this by myself. But we know in our lives, and I believe this, and this is a big message of the mentor sessions, that we're not doing it alone, that we have a lot of people surrounding us and helping us and helping remind us, like, hey, we have a purpose. We have one more day to live for something. Who were some of the people that were there for you during those moments that helped you see that, like, this is going to be okay? You had invented, if you will, this Grandpa Mike character, and that's kind of a cool concept that you put, and I'll tell you, for me personally, it's not a Grandpa Mike. I look to a younger version of myself that basically that inner child is a good way to put it.
Yeah, sure.
But in your life, who was it that, like, was there that you saw believed in you and was helping you get to where you are now, getting through all that?
Yeah, so there's been a few people. I mean, you don't know who's really going to be by your side or who follows you along the way. I mean, I've had mentors, all my life, but because I wasn't always open to it, there was, people who just gave me advice, and I didn't know what level of mentorship. Like one of my first, I guess mentors. The only thing he said to me, we bowled. I was a really good bowler in New York State, and he once came over to me. He goes, "Kid," I was about 18. He goes, "Kid, life is going to go by in the blink of an eye. You're just not going to realize it." And I'm like, dude, this guy's 60. What the hell does he know? What the hell does he know? Yeah, at 18, man, 60 sounds like 1,000 years away. But I now know at 57, guess what? It's in the blink of an eye. I believe me, I've done a lot in those years. It doesn't always feel that way, But when I think about it, when you talk to your inner child, right? When you think about some of those things that you did as a child or a teenager or things like that, it's a blink, man. And so, there's been people along the way. I mean, my first girlfriend, the girl who died, her brother was one of my biggest mentors, and he eventually died saving his family in a fire. And
Oh wow.
yeah, so, but he was one of my biggest mentors. I think about every day almost, because what my life might have been if he was still here. You know, there's just so many people that have had huge impacts in my life throughout the years. And, even my friend Dan, the day I attempted suicide, he was trying to call me. He was going to drive down to Philadelphia because he thought I was there. I was like, I don't know who thought I was in Philadelphia, but that's incorrect. But thank you. So it got us closer to that way. I mean, my ex-father-in-law, Lou, he's been a mentor. He was a mentor. He just recently passed. So
I'm sorry for his passing.
yeah, but he was a mentor. I mean, even after the divorce with his daughter, he would talk to me every now and then. He'd reach out. We'd have some conversations. He was a very special man, and he is a very special man.
Guiding points that he gave you that you were like, okay, I get where this is coming from, and I'm glad I have him in my life.
There were so many times. I mean, we went kayaking together and having some deep conversations about the family, about just life in general. So there's a lot of private conversations like that. I mean, that's why in some of my books, I've kind of thrown the what is it, Easter eggs to Lou. One book actually I wrote about him. He loved riding motorcycles, so there was a motorcycle sage. He used to ride motorcycles and would tour the country. He would take these little road trips. But he had a way of talking and loved talking about Lou and loved talking about so many things that I said, I bet you he's had some stories. And he shared some stories on his bike trips. And I was like, the country, the country needs a motorcycle sage. And so that was one of my books that I put out there. I wrote another book, Redemption, which the second book is coming out very shortly, where they also meet the motorcycle sage. So there's a little Easter egg. I have a children's book coming out, The Long Road, where it's about, the modeled after Lou and riding with one of his granddaughters. So it's lots of little pieces of, he had a big impact in my life because of the friendship. And even when things weren't going so well, he still was there to support me.
So what's one of the greatest lessons that he's taught you that you now really try to teach and pass forward?
Just be you, man. Just be you. Be observant, be self-aware of a lot of things, but where that was one of my Achilles heels. I wasn't always self-aware of what I would do. I thought everybody understood what my heart was doing, but they didn't. And I guess at the end of the day, I didn't understand what my heart was doing with the stents.
What's so funny is like you said that, and I had that same kind of joke pop up in my head. Apparently, you didn't know what was going on in there either. So
Yeah,
that's kind of funny.
Yeah, the funny thing about the heart is the two that were blocked were very, very blocked, but the rest of the heart, the muscle was good. I didn't have a heart attack, so it also is very symbolic. The stuff I do, I do it either really, really well or really, really bad. And
go big or go home.
yeah, but I've learned from it, and that's where right now I'm, rebuilding my physical opportunity, but I've been so mentally strong. Again, when I was in the hospital and the doctors, they saw me typing on my computer and they're like, "What are you doing? You shouldn't be working." I go, "I'm writing a book." And they're like, "What?" I go, "Yeah, I'm writing a book." I'm I had written many books, and that's why I'm really pushing to get those out, because of the fact that they would have died on my computer. I mean, that's really, my kids would have cleaned out the computer. They would have been like, "Hey, we got a new computer. Great for us." And then my stories, the times. So I love getting them out there for anybody who wants to have those stories, because they're really like homespun stories. A book that's coming out later this week, is what is it? Master of Memories and stuff like that. Moments. It's dedicated to my neighbor across the street. When I got divorced, when I was still struggling through that, man, am I going to even make it from past suicide, and mentally, I make it physically, but mentally, she came into my life, and She provides dinner. She's a 97-year-old woman who every Sunday night, I have a little extra Sunday night dinner. Would you like some? Connie, you don't have to do that. But we sit there and I talk to her and she talks to me and she won't let me buy flowers. She won't let me get her a gift. She yells at me. So she knows I'm an author. So I always give her copies of the book. And I said, I'm going to write a book for you. And it really is, one of those things. You sometimes have to pay attention to the mentors who are out there. You have to look a little deeper at times and be the person who shows up in the help. As a former law enforcement, right, in all the accidents, there's always somebody who shows up who might not be law enforcement, but they'll show up to try to help out, try to be that person who kind of pays it forward.
Yeah, and that's the important lesson that I think, that's one of the important lessons I'm really trying to push forward, is taking these lessons we have. It looks like you are documenting the lessons that Lou gave you, and you're trying to make sure those lessons don't die with you, and you use that analogy of making sure they get out of your computer because, when you pass, your kids are going to just, well, here's dad's old computer, wipe it, sell it, something. But you have a lot of information stored on there that needs to get out there and needs to be heard. And then you just talked about Connie, this sweet 97-year-old lady who also kind of took you in. And I like something you just said, if you don't mind. You talked about how, like, the mentors are always, sometimes they're just the people that just showed up at the right time. They didn't come in with an official title. You're not paying them. They're just people that come in and show up when you need them to be there for you. And you mentioned Lou and you mentioned Connie. Do you prefer when you build a relationship like that you learn from someone, versus having to go out and seek an actual, okay, I need to learn this. I need to learn how to be a better entrepreneur, be a better author. Or do you prefer when you look back and you're like, man, I've learned so much from this person? Does my question make sense?
Yeah, no, it makes complete sense. I like it both ways. I mean, there's some things that Lou and Connie couldn't teach me, and then there's things that I've gone to other people, to learn things about some entrepreneurship. I mean, I couldn't have learned Haven or some of the healing modalities I did from those people. I think there's so many people, and we should keep growing as we're getting older. No matter what, I think the day that you stop growing older is the day you accept death. And while I was prepared to die, I'm not now. I'm going to learn. I want to teach people. I want to pour into people who want it. There's so many people who, just want to have things. So I have another story. One of my best friends growing up, I do have some friends, and he died unexpectedly. And he had no brothers, no family other than his mom who had Alzheimer's. And I always promised him, hey, dude, I'll take care of your mom. Go away, take care of yourself. Well, he didn't take care of himself, and he died unexpectedly in his 50s. So I helped clean out the apartment. His mom had Alzheimer's. And one of the envelopes, in fact, I have it right here because I purposely have it with me, is a passport. This is Kevin's passport. Empty. There is nothing in it other than his picture. And that's the message I also have. This was after my suicide attempt, but we all have those promises. The cemeteries are full with unfulfilled promises, right? And that's one of the biggest things. One of the lines from The Bronx Tale, anybody who's seen that movie, right? Unfulfilled.
Watched it just the other night, actually. I had to turn it back on.
Yep.
It's such a good movie. Such a good movie.
Messages in that movie, but it's that unfulfilled promises. I am determined to not let people have it. And, in the coaching space, there's a lot of people who, will tell you things and not necessarily give you the full battle. And I'm like, no, man, at some point I'm going to meet Grandpa Mike again. I'm going to meet God. I'm a man of faith. I'm not very religious, but I'm a man of faith. And I don't want anybody to say that I've taken money from somebody and didn't provide. I want their stories to get out there. We have such powerful stories to get out there. And there's so many people who need to hear our stories. Everybody has a story, even when you don't think you do. I've learned that I've been able to sit with people, and I do some ghostwriting. People are like, I don't have an interesting life. I go, but your family needs to hear it. And then once we're sitting to it, and then they're like, well, yeah, there was that one time that I met the Dalai Lama. I'm like, whoa, take a step back. Yeah. Well, I just said hello. He heard my music and he said, very nice. I go,
yeah.
Okay, that's let's have that.
And it gave you, what is it? Everlasting clarity when you pass, I think
Yeah,
whatever it is.
all these things that we don't know. Even my friend Kevin, had stories or he's been part of my story. And that's such impacts of where we are. So that's where, like with mentors, everybody could be a mentor. It's not only the people we see on TV, the rock stars, the ball players and things like that. Yes, they could be mentors, but the mentors is like the guy in the bowling alley who told me
Yeah, 100%.
he had no right to tell me, he didn't, he just thought, he was being nice, truthfully, and he was truthful because look at this, all these years, I don't know where he is at this point, but I'm still passing on his memory and I'm still
Yeah.
passing on the legacy. And that's why I think we also need to have books because traditionally one or two, generations, we disappear. Nobody talks about their great grandparent, a little bit easier now with, social media and things like that. But man, the messages, the knowledge we have, that generational knowledge can't stop just with me. And that's one of my goals is, when somebody picks up any of my books down the road, the knowledge will still apply. The fact that I wrote it, maybe it'll excite somebody, maybe not. That's not important. It's the knowledge that I'm going to leave behind. That's the legacy that I want to have, not just the fact that I wrote a book or I got a badge, I did something. I want the impact to be tremendous. And that's why I love being a mentor versus being a coach. A coach sends in plays. I don't want to tell anybody what to do or how to live their life because you look at my life, man, it's been a wiggly road, but I have to tell you, I've gotten a lot of great nuggets from it. And with each bad thing, I learned something good as well out of it. I was able to find that silver lining and it hasn't been always easy. And sometimes there is no silver lining. Things suck. Sometimes life will life. But it's the way we get through it that makes us that much stronger.
Well, you brought up a few points I want to touch on. First, let's go to that nugget that guy told you where he's, hey kid, this is going to happen in a blink of an eye. You were 18 at the time, and that was probably, it sounds like probably about 37 or 38, 40 years ago that occurred. And I'm sure that realization right now just kind of like popped you and hit you that, God, that was 4 decades ago. But it's one of those nuggets that he probably made this offhand comment based on something he was seeing, maybe a conversation going on. But that nugget has stuck with you so long. I had a nugget like that helped me a lot through my law enforcement career, where an officer that was with the sheriff's office, and he went to a different agency, but we met up with him, and I hadn't met him yet. I think that was the first time I met him. Met up with him at the range, and everybody's like, oh, hey, how is it now? How's your new blah, blah, blah? And he goes, look, man, it's all cyclical. He goes, right now, this is the place to be. This is a place everybody wants to be here. Everybody loves it. But 5 years, it's going to be the sheriff's office again, or it's going to be this agency again. And that offhand passing moment, anytime things were starting to get kind of like down and dreary in my career, because 20 plus years, you experience those. It's all the highs and lows and the ebb and flows that we go through. I always remember that, like, okay, this will pass, leadership changes, opportunities come up, and, it's going to pass. So that was such a great thing. And then you also talked about how, like, it's not always silver linings, there's gray out there. And going back to a mutual band, it sounds like we both like, but that's that's a great line in the book, in the song Touch of Gray, that like every silver lining has a touch of gray. And we have to, like I mentioned before, we have to be willing to climb out of that pit. We've got to be willing to see past that touch of gray. When I was going through a really dark time, and usually when I'm in a dark time and things are really stressful, if people dare say the words to me, just look at the light at the end of the tunnel. I always say, well, I feel like that light's just the freight train headed my way. That's a Metallica line.
Yep.
And so I don't want to look for that. I got to get out of the tunnel, but we have to, and to be surrounded with people that are there for us when we're in those dark times, or that they know just what needs to be said to just push us one more day, to help us one more day. You mentioned Kevin's passport, and I was thinking, man, what a great imagery. How important is it you keep that with you or by you? Hopefully, we're not violating any federal law by talking about this, but having someone else's passport.
Yeah, it's not valid.
Yeah, no. And how the pages are blank. And when you said that, my heart just like jumped, for lack of a better way to put it, because he had that and he never filled it up. He never took those opportunities or trips. And I'm sure there's a lot to that, but that's something that makes you think. And, my wife and I, we just got our passports a couple of years ago, and we talked about, man, we need to either just like take a road trip up to Canada, which is, a day and a half, 2 days, just so we can say we've stamped our passport, because how important that is.
Yeah, it's a promise. That's what that's one of the talks I talk about. It's a promise. We get a passport. You don't just get a passport because you want to hang out at an amusement park. You get a passport because you promise yourself that you're going to travel. You're going to see something greater than you. And that he had all the means. He had everything that he had to, but he kept on putting it off. And we don't know what that end date is. He didn't plan his end date. It was unexpected. He might not have been feeling well and things like that, but he didn't plan. He didn't think that was where he was going. And you don't know. He worked a whole life, and the things that he missed, while he was able to experience things, and I was able to experience some things with him, but man, that empty passport hurts my heart much more every time I think about it and when I talk about it, because it's those promises that we make ourselves. We just like, yeah, I'll do it. Hey, even with me, with this heart thing, would I have reduced 20 pounds? Yeah, I might have got to it. I was thinking about working out, but that's how I got actually to the great story. So again, mentors, Sam Champion, I was watching Good Morning America, right? I was, working from home that day and watching Good Morning America. And he's talking about, that he had just experienced something like that. And he was like, men, especially men, because we don't check on ourselves enough. He goes, I need you to go in and get checked up. So I was like, all right, man, I'm going to Google. I didn't get out of bed yet. I was like Googling, cardiologist where I live in New York and my health coverage. This is, again, I don't know how you believe, but there was a guy who had an appointment at 3:00 that afternoon. 2 days later, I was on my stress test, which I failed. And he goes, I think you got a problem. Let's go for the cardiac, the CT scan. We did that, man. And they were like, I walked in there at 9:00 in the morning, 12:00, the doctor calls me and I go, you're not calling me to have a good weekend. He goes, no, I'm telling you to sit your ass on the couch. He goes, I don't want you to do anything. No yard work, no anything. It was April. And he goes, and if you're not feel well, I want you to go directly to the emergency room, which I did the next morning. And they said, you get to spend a weekend here. And Monday morning, we had the procedure. And, I didn't know how serious it was. I knew the blockage, and I'm like, all right, no problem. They could fix it. We get so comfortable in the technology that we have right now. But I'll tell you, when you're laying on that table in the CT lab, and they're showing you a heart on the screen, these huge screens, and then you're like, that's my heart. And then you start feeling levels of pain that I hadn't experienced yet. And I go, hey guys, I just want you to know. He goes, yeah, we're doing the blockage, about another 30 more seconds. And I'm like, whew. And he goes, how'd you like that? I go, not so much. It becomes a completely different situation, because I've gotten, since now people are like, oh, I've gotten 8 stints. I got that. I'm like, dude, man, the one's good for me, man. I'm okay. I'm trying to take care of myself. I don't want to ever have to go through that again if that's within my control. And, you learn when it's your heart, man. They're in your heart. They don't have minor heart surgery, right? Yes, it was not open heart surgery, but you don't have minor brain surgery. You either have surgery or you don't, right? This was not cosmetic at all. So it puts you in a different perspective. And with that perspective, there's a urgency for me, is to make sure that my messaging is clear, that one, hey, whoever's listening to this, go get checked out. I was just at a family event this weekend, and I don't know, the other side of the family that well. And I'm talking to this guy, and I'm like, hey, do me a favor, please go get checked out. He goes, yeah, no, I get it every year. I'm like, all right, great. I'm not here to tell you panic wise, but if you don't get checked out, I didn't get checked out. I was fine. I wasn't on any medication. Even when I went in, my blood pressure was a little high. It was 130/90. It wasn't crazy, but they're ready to throw medicine at you. And I'm like, whoa, let's figure out some things. So, I'm working to get off of all of the medication, because, to the extent that I can, I want to live the healthiest life that I can. in the best way possible. And I want to make sure those messages get to the people who need to hear those messages.
Yeah, and there's a lot of messages that you've gone through, especially when it comes to your heart. And I think we can take that message of as physical as well as metaphorical. You know, taking care of your heart through mental well-being and taking care of it. And if I can ask the question this way, during that physical challenge, during the mental challenge of losing your girlfriend at the time, going through your divorce, feeling like you were all alone and stuff like that, what was something that you needed to hear that you didn't think anyone was saying? That if one person just said, "Hey, Dave, you need this," what was it you needed to hear, but you felt like nobody was saying?
Well, during the suicide attempt, I didn't know that I had as many people in my corner that I did, and that's why I always tell everybody they're not alone. Though we want to feel alone. So when I lost the girlfriend, I wanted to be alone, man. I wanted everybody to leave me alone. I was I was in dark spaces. I wasn't unsafe at that time, but it was really tough, and that really taught me a lot. I mean, but you're never alone, and that's why one of the nicknames I have is Uncle Dave. When I was a recovery advocate, I help people through that, and I'm always there for you. I'm a phone call away. And how I got the Uncle Dave, we were talking to a state senator, and they're hearing all these horrible deaths. I'm sure you've had to deal with it in law enforcement. Is the overdose deaths, and we're talking about it and he's kind of tuning out, not being really disrespectful, but there's only so many stories you're going to hear.
Yeah, no, I know that feeling that it comes to a point where I think to give people the benefit of the doubt, it becomes a sensory overload. Like I've heard this way too much. I gotta absorb it. And as the storyteller, as the person sharing that's something I think we need to be conscientious of like, all right, is he getting the picture? Because what we tend to do is we want to make sure they're getting the picture, and we don't recognize the hearer is getting a sensory overload.
Yeah, and
overdose.
That's what happened in that instance. So I see that because I've been in through my corporate career. I see when people tune out, and
yeah. And then there's people tuning out because they just really don't give a damn. And that's the hard thing is you're trying to share a message, and until you've been touched in your life by overdose deaths and the ugly image that is addiction, or the ugly demon, I think is a better way to put it, that is addiction. It's real easy to tune it out. I remember I was sitting in I was at a church service one day, and this gentleman was next to me. He was a neighbor. Great guy. I still love and respect him today. And he's like, "So you work at that jail there, huh?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Man," and he went on this little soapbox rant where he wasn't being unkind, but he was being naive and unknowledgeable, talking about how drug addicts, they're worthless. They don't know what's going on, and we should just lock them up. And a couple of things that were going on during this is there was another gentleman sitting next with us, and I knew his son was an addict and had been in and out of recovery. And so he had a little more knowledge as to what was going on than what this fella was saying. And so I kept watching him to see what he was going to do and what he was going to say. And ultimately, he just kind of piped up very compassionately and not monotone, but just very subdued. He said, "There's a lot of our neighborhood was by a cemetery, and he says there's a lot of really good kids that are buried in that cemetery because of addiction." And and I thought that was like, I wouldn't have reacted that way. If that were my child, I would have been like, "The hell with you. What do you know?" Because, this gentleman, he was a great dad, and he had a great family. And, it's sad that his kid got into addiction, but.
Well, that's the thing is we think that it's all about from the bad families, and now the story was going is I wanted to take away from that, and I did listen to the woman's story. I interrupted the conversation. I said, "I don't want to hear the story anymore. We're here, and he's going to throw us out in a few minutes. So we need to know. I want your money. We came up here for your money. You want to hear stories? We can have here all the time." And I did, so the woman was upset because I interrupted her, and I said, "I'm going to listen to your story, and I'll mention your story all the time, but we need to make sure that we get the funding to do it because everybody's always looking at the addicts. But I'll tell you, I grew up, right now I'm living in Massapequa, which used to be, it still is a great place to live. It's a white, blue collar, upper blue collar, right? But it's not a bad neighborhood that you would expect. It was the number one place in the country for years for overdose deaths. And it was because of the pills. It's not only about, that's why I hate when they show the needle and the spoon and call them addicts. They're people who use. So again, I was a user in food. I use food as my, drug of choice, right?
Yeah. No, we do that. We do that.
Putting myself up by going, well, it was just food. I wasn't hurting anybody. Well, guess what? If I would have died, I still would have hurt the same amount of people than if I would have done something else. And a lot of times we have to remember the people who are using are generally using because they're using that as a coping mechanism. And that's, where I've really come in as a mentor is I remember working with one kid. He comes in, he goes, man, I just used. And I go, okay. He goes, you're going to be disappointed in me. I go, I'm not disappointed in you. I go, you still showed up for your session. The fact that you used, that's a different situation, but that we could talk about and move forward from. We all make mistakes. And that's the thing is, let's not demonize everybody for every mistake they've ever made. Let's not demonize them because they made a choice that we might not have chosen, or we know better, right? I might know better at times, but I didn't always do better. Now I'm trying to do better and know better as well and keep learning. That's that, keep moving forward, keep learning and moving to a new level in life. We just keep leveling up, man, and we'll get there.
Well, you made such a great point right there that I really respond to. And it's one of the things I try to share as I talk to people is, that kid came into session with you and he's like, oh, I used, and you're going to be disappointed in me. And that's the mindset that demon has, is like, you failed, and we talked about it with eating better and taking care of ourselves. We have a moment where I guess you can say we're quote unquote weak, but we're not really weak, but we just, we enjoy a nice meal. And that demon, and it's the same demon that really destroys addicts' life, if you will. It's that same addiction demon that tells you, well, you know what? You didn't do it. You ate 2 steaks, or, you ate this, that, and the other. Might as well just quit trying. And that's what I learned, is how a lot of those kids feel and a lot of people feel. And one of the great messages, and you mentioned it, is this isn't a defining moment. This doesn't have to define who you are. You get to choose what you're going to do now. Now, are you going to commit to yourself right now to, okay, yeah, I had a big meal, but tomorrow I get to go to the gym. Tomorrow I get to start a different eating plan. Tomorrow I get a whole new batch of calories. Or, tomorrow I get to wake up sober tomorrow. Tomorrow I get to, reach out and try something new. Just because what happened right now, it doesn't derail the whole bus. It doesn't derail the whole train, I guess. I don't think buses are on trains, but it doesn't derail the whole train. It just gives you a new reset point. And
100%. And the word that I kept on hearing you, there's 2 words. It's very small words. The word get. We get to do that. You get to start no matter what. There's a famous saying that one of my mentors uses is, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the next best time? Today. So no matter what, it all can start at any moment. If you haven't done it before, you haven't done it yet. So you get to do it, and then yet, because a yet is a very powerful word. You promise yourself something. Now, you might not get to all your yets, but the goal is to try to check as many of those yets off. What have you done? Don't get resigned. That's where a lot of people get beat down, in having those, man, this is just the way it is. No, it isn't the way it is. You just have to work harder or figure out different things. You have to do something that's maybe is not as comfortable, right? You know it after leaving your career, and then you started something else. And the health, like with me, walking away, I could have stayed with a job. I could have pushed myself into the grave, and plenty of people do it. And I'm not saying that is which way is right. It's which way is right for you and the decisions that you get to make. I'm all in on the things that I do. And that's why I wear my heart on my sleeve. I make sure that the things I do, I do and with what I can with the skill set, and I learn, and I'm still learning. Some of the marketing pieces. There's lots of little pieces of being an entrepreneur that takes you on journeys like life. You could do so much. You just have to find the right people, and that's really at the end of the day when you find the right mentors or the right people. Man, how much is that worth to you?
Yeah, well, I think this is a great place for us to start wrapping up. And the get and yet, two small words. And you go back to Kevin's passport. You haven't filled up your passport yet, but you still get the opportunity to. And so take it while it's there. Dave, I've enjoyed this conversation. I know I've learned a lot from you.
Thank you.
And I get a lot to go back through. The fun thing about doing this is getting to go back and rewatch it and catch those things that you may have missed. One of the questions I like to end every session with is there a particular mentor in your life that you just want to give a shout out and a thank you to? Someone that we didn't get to today, or someone that you think was there and never got the things that you really wanted to give them?
There is a gentleman. He's become a brother to me right now, Michael Faber. Some people might know him. He's in the coaching space. He's been in the coaching space for years and kills it, but he's my mentor. But he's a lot more than my mentor, that if I called him up, he'll answer the phone. Well, you have to call him twice, but that's a different story. Just the way but seriously, there's a lot of conversations I've had with him offline that are there. And I've been down to his home in Delaware. I've been, those are the people that you show up, and that's the type of mentor I am. And that's why, we all need a mentor. We all need somebody to bounce ideas off of. And that's what I do is, I've had a lot of more conversations with people offline than online, because that's where it is. To me, it's still that old conversation about the old handshake, right? The old school way. I don't mind giving hugs. I don't mind telling people I love them, male or female. And it's just because I don't want them to ever have a doubt. And that's one of the people that Michael is. Without a doubt, I know where he stands with me. He'll give me crap, but he'll also do that lovingly. And I love that.
Well, I think, and this has always been my way, if they're not willing to give you crap, maybe they don't really trust you or love you like you think,
And that's what it is. That's the New Yorker, right? Don't make fun. We could all make fun of New Yorkers, but don't you dare make fun of New Yorker. That's really what it is. That's why it's family. And that's what Michael calls his Unleash You family versus a community, because, we all give each other crap and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, nobody else is allowed to give them crap.
Yeah. Well, Dave, why don't you just look in the camera and let the listeners and the viewers know and some of the projects you're working on and where they can find you at.
Well, the great thing is they could find me wherever they find Dave Shemetsky, or davidshemetsky.com. I'm on a bunch of things. I also have my own podcast called Peace, Love, and Bring a Bat. The bat is about bringing awesome thoughts or being authentic yourself. So, I'd love to reach out for a whole bunch of reasons. If you want to write a book, great. I could do that. If you just want to talk, I could do that as well.
Yeah.
That's the real powerful part. Is I'd love to connect with people, because that's how we all get through this thing called life.
Yeah, and I'll be sure to link those in the description of the video, in the podcast, in the episode, so that way people know where to find you. Dave, I really appreciate your time today. I appreciate your thought and sharing your stories. And you were talking about how we get forgotten after a couple of generations, and this is why I like hearing stories and stuff like that, because to me that's one of the greatest ways we can have quote unquote eternal life, is by hearing these stories from the past and sharing them on to the next generation and the next generation.
Yep. Michael says all the time, not on my watch. He lost a brother to suicide, and that's one of the things we've connected with. But he goes, not on my watch. He goes, not on my watch is the story of whoever you want to talk about. So not on your watch, people. Tell the stories. Make sure your kids know the stories. Make sure they know it all. And Mike, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And thanks for joining us. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the Mentor Sessions. We're glad you're here. If you enjoyed the message, please remember those golden words. Like, subscribe, comment, and pass it on to your friends. And we'll see you next week on the Mentor Sessions.